Leyde presenting, and they brought along their professor, John Katinich. So please enjoy.
All right, as she said, I'm Jessie Blyth. I am a senior at Penn State, and my major is Asian Studies actually, but I have a TESOL minor.
My name is Laura Leyde. I am a super senior at Penn State my last semester in art education and Spanish. And this is John Katinich, our professor, the coordinator of the program. He's going to talk a little bit about Penn State's program.
So yeah, I'm here really just to introduce the program a little bit and then hand it over to Jessie and Laura to really share their experience and what they got out of it. So as they mentioned, there's a ESL certificate program that's offered by Penn State University. Here's our group of participants last year. I'm wearing the same jacket, yes. And this is a 15 credit program that runs actually over 7 months. We start in January with an online class. We have weekend class meetings throughout the spring and beginning of the summer. And then the real kind of capstone experience of that is a 5-week immersion experience in Ecuador, where students are immersed in a new language and a new culture, do practice teaching, and then we come back and we have one more kind of weekend meeting, and that's the program. Just a little bit about the history of it. It's we've been working in Otavalo for about 10 years now. The last 4 years have been with Penn State, and this is a program that meets all of the Pennsylvania Department of Education requirements for ESL specialist endorsement. We have a lot of pre-service teachers who do this, who want to get this endorsement. We have some in-service teachers who are working in schools where they see the changing population of their students. They want to get this certification. And we also have students who are not in education who want to get this as an independent credential for their kind of professional goals. So we have a really wide range of students who participate in the program. During the time in Ecuador, I think Laura and Jessie will talk a little bit more about those specifics, but we have a language study in Spanish, or Quechua, which is an indigenous language. We have a homestays, which is really one of the keystone parts of the program, where each student is on their own with a family in Ecuador, in Otavalo. And then we have a mini school, which we call mini school because it's like an after school or English camp program that we organize and plan. And our students are the teachers for that, so they gain some hands-on experience working with Ecuadorian language learners during their time there. We really see this program as a kind of intercultural, it's an intercultural experience that drives professional growth and professional development. And I could talk more about our model and why we think that, but I think you'll learn a lot more and gain a lot more if you hear it from them. So I'm just going to pass it over to Jessie and Laura, and they're going to talk a little bit more about their experience during that program.
Thanks, John. So one of the first things that we did on the program is we arrive in Quito, and then we have a 3-day orientation there. So this is some of the things that we go and see a view of the whole city, which is a real contrast to what Otavalo is actually like. It's a much smaller town. The people are a lot more easygoing in a lot of respects. But one of the key things that we did in Quito is we actually went and observed in the classrooms in Ecuador, and we saw what the classroom environment is typically like in some of the schools there. And that was, I think, a really valuable experience for us because some of it was so much more unique and different from an experience you might see in an American classroom where people are on task, but they're also maybe very quiet. They have to be in their seats. It's a lot more rigid and structured. In Ecuador, a lot of it was a lot of people on task, but maybe a lot more relaxed again. And then from that, we went to Otavalo and we did our 5-week experience. So I was in the high school group, which was ages 14 to 21. There was a really wide range of language abilities and English speaking abilities in the classroom. But we did a language integrated approach, and our theme was journalism. So at the end of the 5 weeks, they actually had their own published Otavalo journal that they wrote up on different subjects that they had vocabulary and grammar development through. And so on the left there's a picture that we did various different games and really hands-on activities, and then we would also do more formal kind of writing responses to make sure that they're actually getting the information down. And then here are 2 excerpts from their final journal. They have their title that they voted on there, and then they did a fashion section, a weather section, a sports section, and just an introduction of their town section.
All right, in my classroom, we had a much wider range of ages. It was sort of the classroom that got all the students who weren't put in other classes. We had ages 9 to 16. So there was really a wide difference in about their English language ability, and our focus was the ecology of the Amazon. And with that, what we did was a lot of vocabulary building activities, some reading and writing, and a little bit of grammar to go along with that, and verbs. And their final project was like a portfolio that they put together about the different animals and the plants in the Amazon and the different peoples of the Amazon. And it was a really good experience, but it was also a little bit difficult because they had such different language abilities, and the challenge was really in making sure the activities were going to be interesting to each student and being able to tailor that activity to their language, individual language level. Alright, so as John mentioned, another key component of the whole program was being language learners ourselves. And I was one of the students, the most common language for a student to learn while in the program was Spanish. And I had some previous experience with Spanish, but I was in no way fluent in the language. So the goal of that was to put yourself almost in the place of the students and have that language learning experience where you're immersed in another language and another culture. And it was really challenging because we had our instructor who would only speak to us in Spanish, and as he mentioned, we stayed with a homestay family that would only speak to us in Spanish. So it was a really good experience in that sense, to have that sort of immersive language learning.
And kind of put you in the...
Yeah, put you in like the sort of the opposite position where your students are going to be.
And then for 4 of us and another instructor that were already either Spanish or Spanish education majors, we opted for learning Quechua. And for those of you that don't know, Quechua is actually a dialect of Quechua, the language spoken by people that were indigenous to the Incan Empire. And so I do have my textbook here if anyone wants to flip through it later. But for us, it was really fascinating, already having spent over 10 years learning a second language, to start at square one again and to have to go back and kind of remember how frustrating it can be to be at the very beginning of an entire category and system of language and be completely incapable of communicating your wants and needs and understanding what other people were trying to, effectively communicate with you. But it was also a really fascinating asset for us as language learners because it really showed us the tie between language and culture, not only in the sense that in Ecuador itself, Quechua is affected by Spanish and Spanish is affected by Quechua, but also because even the words that we were learning in the very beginning of this class were so different from vocabulary that we would learn in Spanish or in English. And so I have here 2 pictures of weaving, which is sort of the principal artisan craft of people in Otavalo. And then even before the Incan Empire took over the region, they were really proud weavers, and so they've actually kept that culture through centuries. And so one of the first words that we learned in Quechua was awana, to weave, and then we would conjugate that. If you were to be in an English classroom, you probably wouldn't learn that word until, maybe a 2nd or 3rd year intermediate level, I don't know. But, so it's, just the sort of things that they valued in the culture were extremely prevalent in the teaching that they were doing in their daily classroom, and that was really driven home through our language learning.
And so because of that connection between language and culture, a lot of times when you're learning a new language, you're also learning a new culture. So for our students, as we were teaching them English, we had to be mindful of the fact that, like she said, where they might learn weaving as a first sort of like traditional lower level verb, we might have watch TV, which culturally is going to be very different to what they're used to, and they might not understand a lot about how to use that. So that was like one of the difficulties that we encountered when teaching them. And then also like the empathy that was created by the fact that we were language learners in addition to teaching them language was really useful because as a learner we could understand what they were going through, and it also gave us a unique opportunity to kind of see their culture firsthand, being immersed in it ourselves and applying like our understanding of where they were coming from to how we were approaching teaching them in the classroom. We could literally see their home life and their school life and their after school life, and it gave us like a deeper understanding of where they were coming from as students and how we could, you know, adjust to that as teachers.
And then tying into that is really the really great diversity that's present in Otavalo, which I think is one of the main reasons that Penn State goes to Otavalo, Ecuador. So this is the main market in Otavalo, which is a really big indigenous area for their artisan crafts, and then also a celebration of Inti Raymi, which is, or not even, they have this thing. And then also a picture of Otavalo in the Grand Square. And so you see there's a combination of mestizo people, there's a combination of indigenous people, mulatto people, international students like us that are coming to work with the community, and it becomes a really powerful mix of cultures. So bringing that back into the classroom in the United States, it's one thing to know that cultures are really different and to be able to theorize that in your brain, but it's another thing entirely for us anyway to go there and to see just how different it can be between one person and their next door neighbor in the same tiny town. And so for us it was really important to see that the oversimplification of cultures upon entry into the US could be a really big struggle for lots of Latino students. Not only because between different countries in Latin and South America, they have completely different cultures and centuries of different traditions and histories, but also even between students that are both Spanish speaking or both Quechua speaking, the differences can be hugely vast. So here I actually have a picture of my independent traveling afterwards. I went to Peru, and some of the things in Quechua were really the same, and other things, because there was dialectal differences and because a lot of people that speak Quechua don't really get to travel a lot between their own communities, the differences in the history and the culture and the dress and the garb, everything was totally different. And so you really can't, from one to the other, assume anything about your students and what they're going to be going through or what they're remembering from home.
So then what this comes back to is the question, why is having an abroad experience or teaching abroad so valuable as a TESOL instructor, an ESL instructor? And it's because of basically everything we've talked about, the empathy that you can get experiencing another culture that's different from your own firsthand, seeing these like subtle differences in culture and the complexity, and being able to take your experiences back and the understanding you've gained and apply it to how you're teaching your own students in the US. So, for example, you can't become an expert in every culture in the world and have like that depth of understanding with every student you may have from everywhere. But what you can do is take the sense of that opening, like you're a new world and not understanding, and the empathy you have, and apply that to each of your students, and so far as how you analyze yourself as a teacher and the approaches that you are using.
And then through that you can really value the identity of your own students and validate their experiences and their expertise in their culture by allowing them to celebrate that within your classroom.
Okay, so then ultimately, as far as professional development abroad goes, we strongly encourage anyone who has the opportunity to go abroad to either teach or just have an experience in another culture, because it's very formative, and you can take those connections and the personal experience and the empathy back and use it to enrich your own teaching practice and enrich the experience of your students in the classroom and create a really nice teaching environment.
While simultaneously abroad, you can be enriching and making connections cross-culturally with the students that you're teaching and working with there. So for example, in our program, this was kind of the last hurrah. We received certificates from Penn State and the University of Otavalo for doing the ESL certification course. And then they also received certificates for completing the course with us, but furthermore they received, experience with perhaps their first foreign person, or a lot of different connections between what we valued in our culture and what they valued in their culture.
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening to us, and we have a couple minutes left that we've saved in case anybody had questions about our experience or about our presentation or about the program in general. So if you have questions, please ask them. Feel free. Yes.
I'm just curious, you mentioned that the classrooms there are kind of different from the ones here. Did you try and bend the students to an American style classroom, or did you try to adapt to what they were doing?
Well, I had largely a younger group of students. We really only had a couple kids that were outliers, being a lot older. And I think that, for example, in the Ecuadorian classrooms, what seemed to be the norm was students could be doing almost whatever they wanted. There were students running around and like standing in the back and sitting on their desks, but yet anytime the teacher asked a question, all their hands would go up. So they were all clearly engaged with the material, and the emphasis wasn't really, the teachers weren't really saying, you know, like, stay in your seat, do this, like, show me you're paying attention. They knew they were paying attention, but they were also being active. It was very different. So in our classes, it was like, I mean, culture shock is the best way to describe it, because we had all these kids who wanted to be like out of their desks and on the floor and didn't understand why we were trying to get them to sit. So initially, like the first couple of days, we really struggled with that, and as teachers wanting to force them to sit in their desks, and then so it ultimately it became almost like a compromise, where we did try to create a lot of activities that allowed them to express that and get up and move around, at least in my classroom. And then it made it easier for the times we felt that they really needed to be focused on their work, because we didn't want to become an Ecuadorian classroom. We wanted to show them the American approach as well, and not cater exactly to what they were used to. So I think after a couple of days getting into a rhythm, we struck a pretty good compromise and coming up with sort of a mixed approach.
And then I would add that at the high school level, things were a lot more formal, a lot more structured, and we didn't have those problems really. But it was also understanding that, you know, where they came from, or even how much value they place on school and they place on learning, as compared to some cultures in the U.S., which again we shouldn't generalize. But the other thing is that we were simultaneously taking linguistics classes and world language education classes in the mornings and then teaching in the afternoon. So a lot of what we were trying to do in the classroom came directly out of the Penn State courses.
How strong were the kids in their primary language? Did that have any impact on learning English? Like, were they really strong in their first language?
In
like
writing?
In terms of literacy, yeah.
Literacy, yeah. Ecuador has, like, very good literacy rates, and I know in my class in particular we did an exercise about using the Spanish to English dictionary, and they didn't have any trouble with that. Even the 9-year-old students, the really young ones, they were like overjoyed that they had the opportunity to look up words in their own language to try and. So it was, as far as our reading and writing activities went, it was not there was not a big difficulty there.
Do they have learning support kids? Did you encounter any learning support kids?
Not with our program.
They don't really consider that the same way.
And
I guess.
we should add that a lot of the students and a lot of people in the community are bilingual in Spanish and Quechua, so they were learning English as really as a third language.
Wow.
So Quechua, I don't know how many of our students were first language speakers of Quechua, but probably about a third or so. Although they probably used it only in their home.
Is that mostly just a spoken dialect, or is it a written language?
It is a written language too, although I mean that's a whole other interesting issue of how it's kind of getting more prescribed in its domains, and a lot of parents are worried that their kids aren't using it or learning it enough. But it is Otavalo is a bilingual community, and it's, I don't know if you experience this, Jesse, but for students learning Spanish, it's actually a really great environment because there's so many second language speakers of Spanish. They speak more slowly, and it's really a lot easier to understand than in that context. So.
We have time for one more question.
Did you actually get the chance to choose the grade level that you want to work with? Or how the placement?
We had requests, or I think we ranked it before we left, and then we were partnered up. We were all co-teaching, and then the professors and instructors organized it in a way that was best for everyone.
Yeah. Okay. So is there any criteria that you place students into different grade levels?
Well, we have, like some of the students were secondary English, some of the students were elementary education. So we tried to match that along with also the themes. So, you know, some students didn't want to do a science theme, or some students really wanted to do a language arts theme. So it was a lot of balancing in terms of trying to place it. And I'm not sure. I hope everyone, you know, found that right niche, but it's balancing.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. If anyone needs your, if you have Act 48, make sure that I get around to sign the papers.
Yeah.
Are you going to speak for yourself or for other someone else?
I'm here.
Oh, that's okay.
Yes, before I graduated my undergrad was at Penn State. Anything like this is probably you say it's a unique experience. So probably very few. I mean, I'm interested in exploring it. I just ask you some questions. Because I have contacts in Chile. I lived in Chile for 10 years, so.
You know, there's like once we talk to, you know, people in